This is Talkback 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO, Missoula's news and weather station.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Glad to have you along this morning on this Wednesday, November 20th edition of Talkback. Talkback this morning is brought to you by 123 Seamless Gutters, family-owned and operated business serving all of western Montana. Give them a call, 406-240-2669, where they're protecting the foundation of your future. Harrington Surgical Supply, their mission remains the same, to restore confidence and comfort into your daily life. Y West Storage is out at the Y on Two Smokes Way. If you need a place to store your stuff, and who doesn't, call 406-510-0590, because at Y West we're making room for you. And by Phillips Janitorial, cleaning both your home and your business. No job too big or small for Phillips, so give them a call today. Your satisfaction is guaranteed. 406-260-6617.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Okay, welcome aboard, everybody. Good to have you along this morning. And first of all, the fabulous Nick Christensen right over there. Good morning, Mr. Nick.
Good morning.
And joining us in the studio this morning, two of our favorite guests. Dr. Peter Kolb is with us, along with Sandy Perrin, and we are raring to go with as we are on the cusp of fall and winter, so all sorts of things are going on. So let's just begin by opening up with your any comments. Sandy, we'll start with you. What as you are looking, what's going on outside? We were talking a little bit about how dry it is right now. No snow yet, and very little rain. So, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're certainly seeing in our gardens at work that we're needing to do a little extra fall watering. Anything that you planted late may need to be mulched and watered a little bit longer until the ground really freezes, especially conifers.
Okay. How about you, Ms. Dr. Kolb?
Well, it was a gorgeous fall, but just saying earlier, I was digging some fence post holes a weekend ago, and the soil is very, very dry. So we're kind of, if you look at the weather maps and the drought indices, we're on the western edge of a severe drought bubble crossing central Montana. So that's going to be an issue.
Well, we'll see what happens. Weather-wise, there's weather and there's climate, right? So,
sure.
Weather-wise, we're not really expecting much here in the next few days or week or so. Everybody's kind of tapping their foot, waiting for winter to arrive, and who really knows? So,
well, I mean, the predictions are we are in still a weak La Nina, and we're still in a cool, wet Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And if you've been watching the news, of course, the Cascades of Washington and Oregon are getting hammered with snow and rain. So it's kind of hanging up there, not making it to Montana right now.
Yeah, my daughter and her son, my daughter and son-in-law, my daughter and her son-in-law, my son-in-law, I had one of their neighbor's trees. They had a big violent windstorm in Seattle, and the tree landed right on their deck, and they lost their power for several hours. So, yeah, it wasn't quite as severe as what happened here, but those kind of things are happening all over right now.
Yeah, nationwide, and I've been surprised, and some of the major news networks are talking about hazard trees all across the country, East Coast, all of that. And, of course, if it's happening in New York, that makes headline news no matter what. But I was surprised because I've never seen that before highlighted on the news. So we're not unique.
All right. By the way, the phone lines are open. If you have a comment or a question for our guests, that's why they're here, is to answer your questions. If you have a question about your trees, Dr. Kolb is here about your plants, your gardens. Sandy Perrin is here as well, horticulturist. And so we would love to get your questions and find out what's on your mind. Phone lines are open at 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. You can also use the KGVO app to send in your message. And, of course, Nick will be happy to pass that along to our guests. So we're going to come right back, hopefully with your phone calls and your questions when we return right after this.
Dennis Bragg with the weather. Mixed rain and snow in the forecast through Wednesday night, turning to all rain as we end the week. Snow levels rising to 6,000 feet. We're getting a strong flow of moisture across the northwest from a stationary system off the coast, but that isn't expected to cause major impacts in the valleys of west central Montana. Rain will be persistent, but nothing out of the ordinary for November, although heavier rains and higher elevation snow will be problematic in northwest Montana and northern Idaho, so expect sloppy driving across those border passes.
Hey, we are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. Dr. Kolb and Sandy were just comparing notes a little bit about messages they've received from the FEMA folks are in town, and they have already marked out, and as you had mentioned, yellow ribbons on trees, right?
Right. That if they had yellow ribbons, and that meant that they had some branches that needed to be removed. I believe it was red if the tree was to be removed itself, but I know they're working their way through town to take care of a lot of those low-hanging branches or broken limbs.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I had was a little confused because not long after the storm, there were kind of small groves of trees that had entire yellow ribbon around them. And I said, what's going on with that? And they said, well, they don't want you to walk under those trees because if a branch falls and hurts you, the city could be liable, all that. So, these were all things we hadn't experienced before.
Right. And, I always tell people you do have to look up. We tend not to. But when you're walking under trees, and this isn't unique for right now, there are always going to be limbs that fail and they're hung up in the trees. And, those eventually will come down in one way or another. And so I'm glad that they're doing that citywide now, is removing those hazard branches out there. But this won't go away. I mean, so they'll get them all now, and we'll get a storm, and some branches will fail. I mean, trees get old, they get decay, and they do fail from time to time. So you gotta look up when you're walking under trees.
Well, not only that, but many of the people that I spoke to with the city, especially with the arborists and that sort of thing, were saying that many of the trees in Missoula were getting older anyway, and that they didn't plant them many years ago. Of course, they try to keep the supply fresh, but many of those trees were nearing the end of their natural lifespan anyway.
Well, I mean, that's a debatable issue because a lot of these trees will live up to 200 years, these broadleaf trees, but past injuries, past pruning, and again, there were some really bad pruning practices 30, 40 years ago that are coming back to haunt us now because the bigger the pruning injury, the greater the potential for decay to get in that tree. And many of our trees, especially the Norway maples, will resprout branches from a severe injury. And then they're attached to a rotten base, and that's where we get a lot of our severe storm damage. And then there are, of course, some trees that we've talked about, spruces and even pines. If it's an isolated tree that's much taller than the other trees, and spruces in particular have very dense canopies, they're very heavy. And I'd estimate 80 to 90% of the trees that blow over in a windstorm are going to be the spruces.
Really? Yeah.
And there are ways to deal with that. I mean, so we talk about reduction cutting. I've talked about that before, bringing that top down. And spruces and pines handle that extremely well. Hardwood trees do not. So the hardwoods, they get decay in them. And then the sprouts, the new sprouts, new branches formed by those big cuts that then rot out, and they're anchored very poorly. Whereas the spruces and the pines, they produce pitch. They do also get decay, but they don't grow tops nearly as quickly and as heavy back as the hardwoods do. But even once you remove the top of a tree, then every 10, 15 years, you're going to have to re-prune that tree. You can't just forget about it. And we have a lot of trees that have been topped before, and they've been forgotten about, and now you have very large branches that are attached to rotten bases. And then you get a big windstorm, and then you get what we had this summer.
Sure. Now, will this eventually? Obviously, it is what it is. What has occurred, and the storm is gone, and now we're dealing with the aftermath. So, is this eventually going to turn into a positive for Missoula, or are we going to be looking at areas where there used to be trees and there aren't now?
Well, trees are dynamic. I mean, so you plant them, they grow, they get old, and they die, So maintaining trees is
that sounds like me.
Well, I mean, we can go right to our forestry discussion and, the role of harvesting, et cetera. So we because trees tend to be much longer lived than us, we tend to think of them as static entities that never change, but they do. And then we're shocked when a big old tree falls over, and you have to do an assessment. This fall I spent some time down in Hamilton at the biosciences lab there, which I didn't know was a branch of Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Wow.
So they have a lot of interesting research. I mean, it's a very cool campus there. But they have some legacy ponderosa pine trees there that are 300 to 400 years old. And a couple of them came over, and they did some serious damage. And some of them almost came over, but not quite. So I kind of did an assessment on them and said, well, the odds are that this tree is going to fail because its root system was severely yanked about, and there's a lot of damage on it, and it's going to get a lot of decay in it. But removing a 300-year-old legacy tree is a PR nightmare for them. And I said, yeah, but if one falls over, it's going to be a bigger nightmare. So some of the trees, they're going to do some corrective pruning on them and stabilization procedures. And some of the trees, they just have to remove because the risk is too high. And there's going to be a lot of howling about it. But, what's a person's life worth?
And who makes that decision? Obviously, the average homeowner who may have a great big tree in their backyard and are thinking, oh, gosh, this has been here forever. It's going to be here forever, long after I'm gone, all that sort of thing. And yet someone maybe from FEMA or whatever comes along and said, by the way, that's a rotten tree. It's going to come down. So can we help you, or how does that work?
Well, I would much rather that our local arborist skill that is familiar with Missoula, familiar with the trees here, because trees are, how they grow is a local issue, that they do the determinations. And if FEMA's here, they let the locals determine which trees need to go, and then FEMA will do the work, help get the work accomplished. And maybe that's why the ribbons are on there. So you really got to let the locals make those decisions. And yeah, it's difficult. We have big ponderosa pine trees next to our house. Over the years, I removed those that I considered dangerous. They were perfectly healthy. They were just leaning towards the house. And so if something went bad, I knew where they were going to go. And so the ones we have are not leaning towards the house. But those are difficult decisions because it might be a perfectly healthy looking tree, but it's not. And actually, from where I park to my walk to my office on campus, I watched a house get renovated, and they have a gigantic blue spruce by their house. The diameter of that thing at the base is probably 2.5, almost 3 feet. And during the house reconstruction, all the equipment was parked right on that shallow root system, and they just hammered the root system. And then they put fill and a lawn over it. And I thought, oh, my God, that tree is going to fail at some point in time. And so I stopped one time when the homeowners were out, and I said, I just want you to realize that there was a lot of damage to the root system of these trees, and especially this spruce, and you might consider taking it out. And it's still there. The windstorm didn't knock it over, which really surprised me. It broke off neighboring trees, but not that one. But the amount of root damage that tree got, it's only a matter of time before it falls over. But, you look at it looks perfectly healthy, and nobody would know it unless they had observed what happened.
Unless a tree expert comes by and says, by the way, did you, just as a friendly reminder.
Well, yeah, it's one of those difficult things because the tree that size adds a lot of value to the property.
It does.
And to remove it, you're talking, $1,000 to $2,000 to remove it. So it's a cost, and then you're removing something that maybe that's why they bought the property, because of the trees. So these are difficult, but
and they can be emotional decisions.
Well, it's what's your risk level? It's almost like investing. You know, what's your risk level? So with trees, if it's a real big asset to your house, there are things you can do to minimize that risk on it. But sometimes you just got to think about the worst case scenario. If this comes over, what is going to happen?
Right.
We're actually up against a break. By the way, the phone lines are open. If you have a question for Dr. Peter Kolb or Sandy Perrin, whether it's about gardens and plants with Sandy and with trees with Dr. Kolb, hey, give us a call. Maybe there's some action going on outside your house and you're wondering what's going on. Give us a call, 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309, or you can use the KGVO app. We're coming right back, looking for your phone calls when we come back.
Donors choose. Support a classroom. Build a future.
Did you know that every year, public school teachers spend nearly $500 of their own money for student supplies? Let's do the math. That comes out to over $1.2 billion a year. And that's just not right. At Donors Choose, we want students and teachers to have the tools they need for a great education. And now, more than ever, they need your help. Here's what you can do. Go to DonorsChoose.org and choose from teachers' requests that support reading, math, science, history, and more. Once a request is funded, we'll take care of shipping everything directly to the teacher. It's that easy. You'll receive thank you letters and photos from students and teachers and a report of how every dollar was spent. Teachers' needs have never been greater. Learn more at DonorsChoose.org.
Donors Choose. Support a classroom. Build a future.
As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
It's what we were taught, trained, and told to do.
It could be for anything. Helping a friend move.
Listening to a fellow veteran for hours, at any hour of the day.
Or just simply making time for people. A neighbor, a loved one, or even a stranger.
We're often the first to help others. There's no question about it.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
Perhaps it's time to do for yourself what you would do for others.
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
My name is Teresa Barber. I was in the United States Navy, and I served overseas in the Middle East and Africa. Early on in my career, I had a commander that taught our suicide prevention training, and the very next day, he took his own life. 90% of suicide attempts involving a gun are fatal. My way of continuing my service is to help protect my community by being a responsible gun owner and by storing firearms safely. Store all your guns securely. Help stop suicide.
Brought to you by End Family Fire and the Ad Council.
All right, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Peter Christian here, Nick Christensen over there, taking your phone calls this morning. Joining us here in the studio, Dr. Peter Kolb, MSU Extension, and the W.A. Franke School of Forestry and Conservation. He's here with us. And Sandy Perrin, Missoula County horticulturist, is also here. Now, you received an email, Dr. Kolb, that you wanted to address.
Yeah, well, we, got a very nice email from David Reitmeyer. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Had some lawn questions and some tree questions, and one of the questions.
Since you're both here,
right? Well, I mean, and certainly want to be appreciative for him sending that question in, along with some very nice words for the program. But
right.
So the yellow ribbon around a tree on the boulevard, I think Sandy answered that. That probably has some issues, but apparently probably not slated for removal, where a red ribbon is to remove that. And there's going to be some areas, Sandy, you were saying, or Peter, you were saying that where they're going to block off boulevards to remove trees. So
right.
Got to have a little bit of patience to get all that stuff done. But then there was an interesting question about lawn aeration, and I'm an idiot when it comes to lawns. So I mow the grass, and I try not to water it too much so I don't have to mow as much. That's about as far as I go. And I kill noxious weeds. But Sandy, so there was a question here about liquid aeration.
Yeah, so that has came up in the last year or so, and I had never heard anything about it before. I did a little research on it. I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around that because there are so many different types of soils.
Isn't that an oxymoronic to say liquid aeration?
It doesn't quite compute on that. And so I did a little research on it. And like I said, the different types of soils, I think is such a big factor. I can't quite understanding how that can work on a heavier clay soil. That to be effective, because it feels like to me it's compacting it.
So you're injecting under high pressure liquids into the soil.
Yeah, and I'm just not quite sure how that will be that beneficial, depending on the type of lawn and soils. So I'm a little, most of the research I did not really embrace it.
Well, I mean, and kind of along those lines, just on a kind of a logical thought train. Of course, if you water your lawn and get some moisture into your compacted soil layers before it freezes, the freezing of that water will aerate your lawn because that expands and that pushes apart the compaction. So, that's another just simple backyard tactic that you can use.
Well, and typically when we physically aerate it, take those plugs out, a lot of times it's recommended to put something like a chunky type of bark substance like soil pep or something like that composted bark, that you have those particles that go into those holes that keep that soil profile open then, and so it's not just filling back in. So there's that portion to it too. So in
lieu of snow, which we haven't gotten yet, and now people know it snows and we don't see anything and we just kind of forget about it until spring. But what does snow do? What does the snow do aside from providing necessary liquid eventually when it melts? But it does other things as well, because we don't have any right now.
Right. It's also an insulator for a lot of plants. So a lot of our conifers, things like our hollies or Oregon grapes, even some of our low-lying spruces like that, those are really a great insulator for plants, or even perennials that are not quite as hardy here. Maybe they're on the border, or we have a 30 below that's a little unusual. That snow acts as a really good insulator for plants.
And, for biological communities, so when you get a good snowpack, the soil doesn't freeze under it, and you may not be aware, but there's a lot of decomposition that occurs underneath that snowpack all winter long, which is really essential for nutrient recycling. So if we get a super cold without snow, then the soil freezes, all the microbes freeze. It doesn't necessarily kill them, but they become inactive, so we don't get that decomposition going on. And so there's some very specific terms about the biological activity that occurs underneath the snowpack. And so, higher up, that's great in the forests. And since our forests are all pretty nutrient deficient, having a snowpack really helps break down the needles that persist for a long time and helps free up the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that gets caught up in that humus layer in the soil.
Now, I've been watching the trees in the mountains up on Point 6 and where one of our transmitter sites is, and I'm seeing, again, very little snow. I mean, just a little bit on the peaks of some of the mountains, but
right.
It's getting a little scary here toward the end of November.
Well, and I'm sure the ski areas are also a little concerned about that.
I'll bet.
We just keep waiting for that Pacific front that's getting hung up on the coast to make it across to Montana. I mean, all of the predictions, and I look at all the long-range NOAA models and all of that, are indicating a much wetter winter than normal because of both the cool, wet Pacific Decadal Oscillation and the La Nina effect that causes the jet stream to move north. So we're getting a lot of air masses coming from British Columbia down across Montana.
All right, well, we're up against another break. We'd love to have some phone calls. That's why Dr. Kolb and Sandy are here to answer your questions. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. And, of course, we'd love to have you use the KGVO app if you'd like, and we'll be right back after this.
Dennis Bragg with the weather. Mixed rain and snow in the forecast through Wednesday night, turning to all rain as we end the week. Snow levels rising to 6,000 feet. We're getting a strong flow of moisture across the northwest from a stationary system off the coast, but that isn't expected to cause major impacts in the valleys of west central Montana. Rain will be persistent, but nothing out of the ordinary for November, although heavier rains and higher elevation snow will be problematic in northwest Montana and northern Idaho, so expect sloppy driving across those border passes.
As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
It's what we were taught, trained, and told to do.
It could be for anything. Helping a friend move.
Listening to a fellow veteran for hours, at any hour of the day.
Or just simply making time for people. A neighbor, a loved one, or even a stranger.
We're often the first to help others. There's no question about it.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
Perhaps it's time to do for yourself what you would do for others.
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
Hey, welcome back to Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Joining us here in the studio, Dr. Peter Kolb and Sandy Perrin, here to talk about trees, plants, flowers, shrubs, and all things nature. They're here to talk about that.
And we can talk about Christmas trees, too.
Yes, we can talk about Christmas trees. Karen is on the line. Karen, good morning. You're on Talkback. Hi.
Hey, Rick, I'll put you on.
Hi.
Hi, Karen. Go ahead, please.
I have a
What?
I said, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. I have a plum tree in my backyard that I know is at least 50 years old. And it's been very productive. A couple of years ago, about a third of it died off, but it's still doing fine. However, over the years, it's put out several sprouts here and there, and I've just dug those up or have several growing up along the fence as replacement. But last year, my goodness, I just have dozens of these sprouts coming up all over my yard and my flower beds. And so I'm not quite sure what to do about them. I've dug up as many as I can, but is this because of the age of the tree, or why is it doing that?
Certainly, if you had a sudden injury to it, that can elicit a reproductive response from the tree. So it's very likely that might be the case. With the injury to the crown, you're getting more sunlight to the soil. So soil temperature also stimulates root suckering. The one thing you want to be careful about is whether or not that plum is grafted or not. So because of its age, it's probably not grafted. And so those root suckers
it's not grafted.
Okay, so so you'll get the same kind of plums out of those root suckers as you will out of the mature tree. So, just for other folks, if you have a grafted fruit tree, the root suckers will produce a very different fruit than the grafted top will. But if you have people that want to dig them out, and you got to get a pretty good root section with it for that seedling to survive, or plant it in a pot and take real good care of it. Just transplanting root suckers can be difficult for them to survive if you don't get enough root with them. But to my knowledge, there's not a whole lot you can do. Like I said, shading the soil, keeping the soil cooler may slow down the suckering a little bit.
All right, but it's just going to keep doing it because the tree is old. Is that pretty much the bottom line?
Yeah, once they start doing that, it's pretty hard to stop it. But old plum trees, they're survivors. With some proper pruning, that tree can last another 100 years. I mean, they will grow back from some of the most horrific injuries and disease issues. So plums are real survivors. So with some good pruning, you could probably get that mature tree to develop its form back again.
Mm. All right. Well, I guess I'll just keep digging up those things. Okay. Well, the ones I let about 3 of them grow along a fence line, and I'm kind of espaliating them along the fence line.
Right.
And they're getting to be productive. I was hoping at some point in time, maybe take out the old tree and just let those be, but I don't.
Well, that's certainly.
If I took out the old tree, would all this suckering stop, or is it just going to keep happening from the roots that are already there?
I don't have a good answer for you on that. It may slow down a bit, but that root system is there. It's a big clone right now that you have in your backyard. So it may slow it down. It may not slow it down. But shoot me an email. I'll come over and dig out some of your sprouts and plant them in my yard.
Okay. Well, it's going to have to wait because I've dug out all the ones I could find.
Well, I'm just saying, if you have neighbors or friends that want a proven plum tree, you know what the fruit is like. That's a great way to, with a little bit of work, to get a free fruit tree. And, you buy them in a nursery. They're not cheap.
Yeah, I see. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Karen, thank you for your call. We appreciate it, ma'am. Ed is up next. Ed, good morning. You're on with Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to thank Dr. Kolb for calling this Pacific Front a Pacific Front and not an atmospheric river. Does that mean we have in a drought, we have an atmospheric creek going on? And another term that is used a lot now is bomb cyclone. Wow. And are you aware of any other things that are coming down the line, terminology that seem to be aimed at TV watchers and maybe not the scientific community?
Everybody loves a nickname. Come on now.
Yeah, I had an atmospheric creek this morning. You take a look at it.
Yeah, if I can't put a canoe on it, it's not a river as far as I'm concerned. But I'm right there with you. When I saw the news this morning and saw the term bomb cyclone, I thought, what the heck is that?
I've lived through a hurricane, so I know a little bit about what that's like, standing on a tabletop shooting rats as they're swimming under your door. So yeah, not a good thing.
Right, we'll give you Hurricane Peter.
All right, Ed, thanks for the call. We appreciate it. All right, Rick is up next. Rick, good morning. You're on Talkback with Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been walking around my yard listening to your conversation on my phone. I have a question about rose dormancy. I have about 28 roses in my backyard, and they will not go dormant, and I'm supposing it's because of the warm weather we have. And I have 2 Canadian roses right now that are actually got orange and red blooms on them. But my question about the dormancy, is this going to, late dormancy, is this going to affect them in the spring? And I have 2 tree roses that I want to trench, and they're just as green as green could be. They don't look like they're even close to being dormant yet. And at this time of year, can I trench those tree roses while they're still not? Oh, I can?
Yeah,
okay.
You can. I mean, you're going to have to do it. We certainly haven't had that, what we call a really killing frost that you usually get that signifies that. So, yes, you can trench those. The others, as long as they're hardy roses, that they're not a tea or a floribunda, they should be fine. If they are a tea or a floribunda, you do need to do that protection, where you're usually putting like a foot of mulch over the crown of the plant. I did mine a couple weeks ago, even though, like you said, they are still green. You just got to get after it because it could change really quickly. Weather in Montana, so wait 5 minutes.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of. And my other question about roses, I try to find Canadian roses. Mm-hmm. I find that they grow really well here, even though they're zoned to a zone 3 and 4, right. And I'm in 5A. I find that they're not as brilliant when they bloom. And is that common for a Canadian rose?
What do you mean by brilliant?
Well, I do have, they're not as, the blooms aren't as massively big, and they don't have the deep colors in them. And they're a little tinier blooms. And I was just wondering if that was common for a Canadian rose due to the fact that they're zone 3 and 4s, or do I just happen to have some that's the way they are?
Well, I mean, that certainly can be with a lot of those species, but then I think of like our Hansa or Rugosa roses. There are some really deep, dark purples and pretty good sized blooms. So it can be just because of that species. Most shrub roses do tend to have a smaller bloom, more in clusters, versus if you think about hybrid teas and grandifloras and things like that have been bred for that reason, that they are bigger, more vibrant blooms because they are more of a florist flower versus what the shrub roses in general are, not as big and colorful. But like I said, like some of the Hansas are still really vibrant color roses, so it just depends on the species. Yeah.
And soils will influence them, So,
certainly.
Our shrub roses, I certainly notice a difference whether they get fertilizer or not.
Correct. And moisture.
I have one more question if you have time. I have some roses on my deck that are in half whiskey barrels, and if I lose them due to cold weather, I'm not going to. I got them at a box store, but they did unbelievably well this year. One of my climbing roses is just, it's growing along my deck railing. Since they're not in the ground, but they're in a pot that's very huge, what's the best way to protect those? I can't pick the pots up. They're too heavy. They're like I say, they're half whiskey barrels. Are they gonna be okay if we just have our normal Montana winter and I mulch them good?
Well, normal is really a very interesting term in Montana, because I think of normal as can be 20, 30 below. So I think you need to put like straw bales around them, some sort of a good 2-foot buffer all the way around that pot to help protect that root and on top.
Okay. Oh, hey, thank you very much.
Rick, thanks for the call. We're going to come right back. We have Cody and Doug who are waiting to get their questions answered, and several other phone lines open, by the way, 721-1290. Dr. Peter Kolb and Sandy Perrin, both here to answer your questions today, all the way till 10 o'clock. We'll be right back.
In Montana.
Need to replace your Social Security card? In most states, you can request one online with a My Social Security account. A My Social Security account gives you secure access to your personal earnings history and benefit status. You can also get a proof of income letter, estimate and apply for benefits, and more. Save time. Go online. Open a My Social Security account at ssa.gov/myaccount. Social Security. Securing today and tomorrow.
Produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.
Okay, the phone lines are filling up. Everybody wants to talk with Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin, so let's jump right back in and say good morning to Cody. Cody, thanks for holding through the break, sir. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning. I do have a question. My father's got two, I don't know what kind of trees they are. They're a broadleaf tree, a big leaf tree in his front yard. There's two of them. They're the same kind. And the question is, every fall, the tree on the north starts to turn yellow, and all of the leaves fall off before the tree that's only 10 feet or so away even it's still green when the tree right next to it all turns yellow and the leaves fall off. This happens every single year, and I apologize if this is too basic of a question, but we're always wondering why it is that if the leaves change due to the shortening of the days, why would they be at different rates? Now, the one that turns later does have access to more water. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about how that works and why some trees hold on longer, or if there is a reason. And I'll take your answer on the air. Thank you.
Thanks for the call.
Sure. Well, I think you've already pointed out one of the most common causes, and it's water availability. And so quite often here in the Missoula, Bitterroot Valley, you'll see some trees turning yellow in early September, even end of August, and that is purely a water supply issue. So when they start to dry out towards the end of summer, those that are drought stressed will just drop their leaves. So that's the most common thing. And soils can vary a lot, especially around houses. So these areas have been excavated, so the soil is quite variable, and you might have trees that are 10 feet apart, and one is in a totally different soil situation than the other one. So the one turning yellow might be in a heavier compacted clay, and it has a more diminished root system. So really just make sure that tree is well watered. But there's also genetics involved. I mean, you can have the same species and they will go dormant at different times of the year. You can even have branches on the same tree that will go dormant at different times. So you'll see a couple branches turning color and the other ones are still bright green.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the tree, right?
No, it's just, they have different triggers on them and different genetic variability that it's amazing that trees will do that, but it's kind of like your left hand doing one thing and your right hand doing another thing, independent of what your brain wants it to do.
So is each tree kind of its own ecosystem? A little?
Well, it is. Yeah. I mean, when we talk about ecosystem, we're talking about the microbes and the bugs and the fungi. And every tree is its own ecosystem. Absolutely. But it's also its own microclimate because how the leaves and the canopy intercepts sunlight, the thermal layers it creates, its vascular tissue. So one side, especially broadleaf trees, are very one-sided. So the roots on the right side of the tree are mainly supplying the water to the branches on the right side of the tree. Whereas conifers, the water spirals up the tree, and so you get much more even distribution on them. So, yeah, there's a lot of variability there, but the first thing I would look at is water availability. But if it's on the north side and it's not getting the direct sunlight and the temperature from the direct sun, it may go dormant earlier also. So there's multiple factors, but I'd start with water and then just look at microclimate, soils, etc.
We're about a minute away from a break, so we'll go ahead and take that now. We have Doug, Bev, and Jim all waiting to talk with you. By the way, Dr. Kolb and Sandy will be with us all the way till 10 o'clock this morning. So keep the phone lines going, 721-1290. They're here to answer your questions, so we'll be right back after this. If this sounds like... We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. All right, let's jump right back in, get as many calls in as we can before the top of the hour. Doug is on the line. Doug, good morning. Thanks for holding. You're on Talkback.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having Dr. Kolb and his associate on the air. The question is, from, I suspect, Greeno Park, we have a problem that's never existed before, and that's a woodpecker that is taking the bark off of our very tall blue spruce tree. Is there an answer to make this guy go away? Because I clean up the mess, and within 20 minutes, it's a mess again.
Well, one, I'd want to identify which of the woodpecker species it is. And probably what you have is a plethora of insects that are hibernating underneath the bark of that tree, and the woodpecker is finding a feast right there, and that's why he's flaking the bark off, assuming your tree is healthy. Okay, and so if it's a big spruce tree, if it's nice and green and you don't have yellow needles on it, then he's basically going after a bunch of hibernating insects that are under the bark of your tree. And sorry for the mess, but he's probably doing you a favor by getting rid of the insects that are on there. I mean, that's like I said, I'd want to know which woodpecker it is. I mean, does it have red on it? Is it just brown? Any identifying characteristics?
Well, I don't have the color scheme of it, Doctor, but you've answered my question. I don't mind cleaning up the mess. I just don't want the woodpecker to kill the tree.
Yeah, no, he's probably actually helping the tree by picking all the insects off of it, which some of them can be parasitic and harmful to the tree.
Thank you very much.
And, of course, by the way, talking to us on the phone right now is one of the great law enforcement officers of Missoula, in Missoula history, Doug Chase. So, Doug, I'm sorry about your woodpeckers, man, but it's good to hear your voice.
Well, it's always good. I listen daily to this program and find it very enjoyable, and the guests very enjoyable. And the great Peter Christian and his producer. Anyway, it's
fabulous,
great.
Nick Christensen. You bet. Much. All right, Doug, thanks for the call. We appreciate it, sir. Have a great day. Bev is on the line right now. Bev, good morning. You're on Talkback. Hi.
Good morning. My question is, how do I get rid of crabgrass? I think the other weed is pigweed and mallow. We have a property that was abandoned for years, and we've been on the place now for 10 years, and it's just overrunning all my flower beds, my garden. And I know, every time I rototill, it just gets worse. So yeah. I just would like to know how to get rid of that.
I'm assuming you probably mean quackgrass, not crabgrass. Crabgrass is an annual here, so quack is perennial and rhizomatous.
Okay.
And that is certainly an issue. There are some over-the-top herbicides that take care of the grass. You have to spray it early when the grass is like 4 to 6 inches tall and actively growing in the spring, and that will remove the quackgrass from your perennial beds. Those broadleaf weeds, they are, ones that are, I think some of those are like winter annuals or just an annual. So there are some pre-emergents that you can put down if you want to use chemicals. on that inhibit the seed germination, but otherwise it's just going to be hand weeding because there aren't anything that's going to take a broadleaf out of a broadleaf bed.
Okay, so the garden beds, it's the I think it's the pigweed, the one, and every time, it's like, I guess, the quack grass. A little rhizome is left behind, and it's just
it's going
more and more and more
propagate. Correct.
Okay, so just chemicals.
Trying to either
what about solarization?
Well, if it's a garden bed, you're going to have to, you're going to have to solarize it for, over a year, because a lot of times we just don't have the heat units here to, take care of that. So that doesn't necessarily reliable, depending, again, if you're tilling, you're bringing new weed seeds to the surface. So solarization isn't going to go down deep into the soils as well.
And the key to a lot of those broadleafs is to, it's labor intensive, but to pull them before they set seed.
Right.
So, you got to work really hard on them in the spring. And once you get rid of that seed source, you've solved most of your problem with the broadleafs.
And if it's a vegetable garden, maybe you want to do some mulching, once you plant things. Put 2 to 3 inches of some type of mulch, whether it's, herbicide-free grass clippings, compost, heavy layers of straw, wool, anything like that you can put on the bed to help when you cut off the light to the soil surface, it does inhibit a lot of annual weed germination.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the call. We only have about 2.5 minutes left in our time. Not enough time to take another call, but we have Jim and Jeff waiting. And by the way, the phone lines, still several phone lines free. If you have a question or a comment for Dr. Peter Kolb, he's, of course, with MSU Extension and the W.A. Franke School of Forestry and Conservation here in Missoula. And Dr. Sandy Perrin is, Sandy Perrin is with us. I could call you doctor, can't I?
Sure.
Yeah.
She has an honorary doctor.
I'm the plant doctor.
The plant doctor. There you go. She's a Missoula County horticulturist. So if you have a question or a comment, give us a call, 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. Now, I was just looking up the story that I did about the urban trees that FEMA's here to work on. There are over 5,200 trees that have been tagged and marked either for hangers or eventual coming down. So that's a lot of trees. So anyway, we have another minute and a half. So I'm sorry, I should take another call. So any words of wisdom before we get to the top of the hour?
Well, I mean, with all those trees coming down, of course, Missoula has pretty restrictive rules for burning wood. But it sure would be nice if the more substantial limbs and trees, etc., were made available for folks to utilize. I mean, we've got a lot of wood artisans and wood turners, etc. So especially the broadleaf trees are great for doing furniture work or artistry work. So I'm not aware, but I don't know if the city has a place where people can go and salvage some of that wood. It would be nice.
And especially if there are artisans out there, I wonder if they've already had a chance to get in touch with the city and say, hey, woodsman, spare that tree. We can do something with that, make it into a work of art or whatever, rather than just ripping it out of the ground and shredding it up.
Right. And, it's carbon sequestration. You turn it into something that you're going to store for a long time.
You bet. All right. So, we have another hour coming up with Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin. So if you want to give us a call, we'd love to hear from you. Waiting on the line right now, we have Jim and Jeff. So we'll get to them right after the top of the hour. So in case you're just tuning in, it's Sandy Perrin, Missoula County horticulturist. Dr. Kolb is here as well. And the numbers 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. Of course, we always like to encourage you, if you haven't already, to go online and get the KGVO app, because you can listen to KGVO all over the world just with that little app in your phone and listen to ball games, you name it. So go and do that.
This is Talkback, 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. KGVO, Missoula's news and weather station.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Good to have you along. It's the Wednesday edition of Talkback. Talkback this morning is brought to you by 123 Seamless Gutters. Let them handle everything that has to do with your gutter so you don't have to, especially before the snow comes. Call 406-240-2669. They're protecting the foundation of your future. At Harrington Surgical Supply, you can feel comfortable and confident in their discreet and knowledgeable guidance on a multitude of products and medical supplies. Phillips Janitorial does your business and your home. They can clean it all, and they do it with your 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Call Phillips, 406-260-6617. And if you need storage, Y West Storage is the place to go, out at the Y on Two Smokes Way. Here's their number, 406-510-0590, where they're making room for you.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Hey, we are back on Talkback. Peter Christian here, Mr. Nick Christensen right over there. Good morning, Mr. Nick.
Good morning.
Right, and joining us here in the studio, Dr. Peter Kolb, MSU Extension, W.A. Franke School of Forestry and Conservation here at the University of Montana, and Sandy Perrin, Missoula County horticulturist, also joining us. Folks have been waiting very patiently over the top of the hour break. Jim is up next. Jim, good morning. Thanks for your patience, sir. What's on your mind?
Hey guys, so I've got a yellow maple in my yard. We bought this house 3 years ago. The bark was damaged on the tree. There's about a 4-foot strip that there is no bark. It doesn't quite go halfway around, and I'm not sure how the damage got there, but the tree was super healthy. Comes out beautiful for the last couple of years. So a friend of mine says, you might put some of that black tar stuff on there to help the tree protect itself last fall. And so I did. And then this year, when it blossomed out, or leafed out, I guess we'll call it, on the ends of all the branches, there was no leaves. The branch was there, a small part of the branch, and some of the leaves were really crinkled, and I thought, oh, man, that tree is going to die. So any ideas?
Well, first off, when you're saying black tar, was it pruning paint or was it tar?
Oh, no, it was pruning paint. It was stuff I ordered online for tree repair or tree.
Okay.
You cut a branch off or something.
Well, this last year, we had several Chinook events that went pretty late, and then we had a very late cold snap. So what you're describing on that tree is what we saw all across Montana. We saw a lot of tip die back because trees started to break dormancy, and then they got frozen back. It's why the cherry crop failed. Flowers got frozen off, all of those types of things. So the pruning paint, if you applied that onto the damaged area, should not have had any impact on the tree other than, again, the point of the pruning paint is to protect the wood so that new living tissue can grow over the wood. And by putting the pruning paint on, you're preventing it from rotting out before that can happen. So the fact the other symptoms on your tree were probably had nothing to do with the pruning paint, but more with just the spring and the winter that we had last year. Sandy, anything?
Also,
thoughts?
you said a yellow foliage tree. Is it yellow during the season or yellow in the fall?
It's yellow in the fall.
Oh, okay. Because a lot of times there are some yellow-leafed maples, and they definitely are more sensitive than a green leaf maple would be. So, just clarifying.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, no, the tree's beautiful except for this last spring. I thought, oh, man,
So,
but anyway, cool. Well, that gives me some hope.
Yeah, so next spring, I'd give it a reasonable fertilizing with a 10-10-10. And just watch the water levels. Might want to add some supplemental water. It lost a little bit of energy this last year because of the dieback, and that's where the fertilizer will come in handy. But I wouldn't apply it now, but in the spring when the snow melts off.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent, man. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
All right.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the call, and thank you for holding as well. Jeff's on the line. Jeff, good morning, sir. You're on with Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin. Go ahead. Hello, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
You are on, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. I have two questions, one for Sandy and one for Dr. Kolb. Sandy, first of all, the iconic blackberry or huckleberry is the Montana plant most people know about, and or at least I know that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to grow that productive huckleberry plant from seed or even transplanting around here. Do you have any alternates? I looked at a various websites. The one that seems to have the best options is one called Rare Seeds, Baker Creek Seeds. And it has several different varieties, what they call huckleberries. They all tend to be varieties of the solanum. And I tried one. It's a garden huckleberry. It didn't really work out that well this year. But do you have any recommendations on those?
No, that's a totally different species. So vaccinium is huckleberries or blueberries. So what you're seeing in those are not even close in the same species, even though the common name alludes to that. Probably the closest, there's not going to be anything that's going to be a huckleberry. Probably the closest is a blueberry or what they call a honeyberry or a housecap. Those are going to be more reliable producers. Here, however, the blueberry requires a lot of soil preparation and acidity, so it's a lot more work and continual work, where honeyberries will not be. They're in the honeysuckle families, so they're very soil tolerant and are quick producers here and can be very abundant. But there's nothing that's going to replace that huckleberry.
Okay. And Dr. Kolb, we have a maple that's got a crotch in it that has started to rot out. I've dug and blown out a lot of stuff from inside, including a bunch of bugs that are down in there. And I'm wondering, do you have any ideas on what I could use to seal that up and stop it from rotting any further?
Well, it's probably a V-shaped fork, which is structurally pretty weak and unsound, and versus a U-shaped fork, which is due to a mechanical injury. And the V-shaped forks, as the canopy gets wind action on it, they kind of split and pull back together, and then you get a bunch of junk trapped down in there. There's no real solution to that other than keeping it cleaned out and dry. If you get water holding in there, then you'll get decay and you'll get yeast going in there, and it'll start weeping and oozing all sorts of nasty liquids out of there. So keep the debris out, and occasionally, if you want to pour something like Daconil down into there, that will kill and inhibit any kind of fungi and even yeast growing in there. But if that's going on, you really want to look at the architecture of the tree and where it is, because V-shaped forks are very prone to failing during late spring snowstorms or high wind speeds. The other thing then, and it's not done a whole lot in Montana, is you can cable the tree. So if the top of the tree, the forks are catching the wind, and the wind is causing it to split apart and then go back together again, if you string a cable as high as you can on the tree, so you got to have a sound stem of at least 4 inches in diameter. And the cabling is tricky business because you want to winch the top together so the cable's always under tension. And then you put that in place with lag hooks that are drilled into the tree. That drilling does very little damage to the tree itself. And that can stabilize some of the wind movement. And if that fork doesn't continually open and close, it'll collect less material and you'll have less of an issue with it. And it won't be you're stabilizing the top, so the splitting of the top is not as big an issue.
Yeah, this is a little bit different. I have 3 branches, so they actually form a crevice that any water coming down the trunk goes into. And I was wondering about maybe putting something like urethane down in there to just seal that up, and then.
Well, I mean, that certainly is a possibility, but it's really the top of the tree pushing that split open and closed that's allowing debris to get in there and causing a problem. So, you can certainly, rather than urethane, I would try some of the spray insulation foam. That stays more flexible, and the whole trick is to keep water and debris out of that crevice.
Right. Okay. And actually, the cabling idea, I was thinking of putting a little platform up there for grandkids to be able to climb up on and sit in the tree. So, and then so holding it together with maybe some wood that rather than cables, but
wood isn't gonna hold as well. I mean, the nails will pull out. And basically your platform will not become unstable if the top of the tree is moving. So the cabling is very strong, and it will keep the top crown from flexing back and forth.
Okay, maybe
it's a specific skill.
For the kids and cabling as a rail.
Right. Well, I mean, I would cable first, and then the platform will be more stable. But you might want to check with some arborists that do that, because it's not as simple as I'm describing it. I mean, everything has to be aligned just right.
Jeff, we're several minutes past a break. I hope that helps. Thanks for the call. We're going to come right back. Buck is waiting to talk with us. And by the way, Dr. Kolb and Sandy will be here till 10 o'clock this morning, and several phone lines are open at 721-1290. We'll be right back.
In a world of complicated...
Dennis Bragg with the weather. Mixed rain and snow in the forecast through Wednesday night, turning to all rain as we end the week. Snow levels rising to 6,000 feet. We're getting a strong flow of moisture across the northwest from a stationary system off the coast, but that isn't expected to cause major impacts in the valleys of west central Montana. Rain will be persistent, but nothing out of the ordinary for November, although heavier rains and higher elevation snow will be problematic in northwest Montana and northern Idaho, so expect sloppy driving across those border passes.
As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
It's what we were taught, trained, and told to do.
It could be for anything. Helping a friend move.
Listening to a fellow veteran for hours, at any hour of the day.
Or just simply making time for people. A neighbor, a loved one, or even a stranger.
We're often the first to help others. There's no question about it.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
Perhaps it's time to do for yourself what you would do for others.
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Good to have you along on Talkback this morning. We're thrilled to have with us Dr. Peter Kolb and Sandy Perrin to answer your questions about plants and trees. And Buck has been waiting. So, Buck, good morning, sir. You're on Talkback. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. Well, before I get to my question, Dr. Kolb, you might be interested. You talked about artisans and making use. I lost a box elder that had some sentimental value to me, and I don't have machinery. I couldn't recover it, but it got me thinking, and I was able to recover a pretty good chunk of cottonwood and intend to use it as a base for an anvil because, steel concrete is not resilient. The wood will kind of rebound when you pound on it, and so there's probably a lot of... uses that you may not even anticipate being made, hopefully, and then not all of this will be producing methane in the landfill, hopefully.
Right. Cottonwoods, you just got to keep it dry. If it gets wet, it will rot almost instantly on you.
Oh, that's good to know, then. I will keep it out of the weather. But my question for the day, there's a number of species that really thrive here, and if they thrive, they tend to get big and have long lives, and as we now know from July 24th, there's lots of opportunity to get damaged in that lifespan, though. If you have a wound, excuse me, that's some horizontal component, it's going to collect moisture and it's going to get rot in it. But if the tree's big and lives a long time, it will grow over that, and it depends on the species. Some do faster than others, but eventually they will net, and then, like in a cross-section, you'll see a complete growth ring. So that injury is completely healed. It's sealed from the outside hermetically, no oxygen getting in. But, of course, a living tree is quite wet. Will that rot continue once a complete healing has occurred?
Depends on the species. So if it's a cottonwood, absolutely. Aspens, poplars, willows to some degree. So some of the true hardwoods, so we get into some of the maples, they do what... years ago, as a professor in Wisconsin, Alex Shigo, who documented what they called compartmentalization. So some tree species will kind of seal off that rot area. But the trick is it has to stay dry. And so, back in the day in the Midwest where that was a real issue, some of the work I did was putting drain tubes into those rot pockets to keep them dry, just to and that was just drilling a hole at a upward diagonal and tapping a copper tube in there. So that any water that collected in there would drain out and keep it dry, and that arrested the fungi, and that helps with the compartmentalization. So It really depends on the species. Ponderosa pine will seal off areas with pitch. Douglas fir to some degree. Ponderosa pine probably better than Douglas fir. And then if you get into some of the more true hardwoods, they will do that as well. But green ash to a little bit of a degree. But most of our native broadleaf trees will not do that.
Okay. Well, specifically, I have in mind a box elder, and they do. I've seen already where wound completely is healed, and you can tell by the bark. It's a complete growth ring, so it's sealed on the outside. Will that tend to kind of limit the rot after it seals up?
It will limit it, but it will continue to decay, but at a much slower rate. Okay, so box elders are right on that. They're kind of considered a junky broadleaf tree, a soft broadleaf.
Right.
But I've dissected enough of them that have partially compartmentalized. So if there isn't an input of water into that decay area, it'll continue to decay, but very slowly.
Do you know the organisms that, I just think of bacteria for decay, but are there other organisms that are operating in there?
A lot of fungi and yeast. Yeast will be very active if there's water in there. If it's dry, the yeast cannot be active.
And when it's compartmentalized, they still can function without outside oxygen?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're getting oxygen through the wood itself.
It does, as well as water. Oxygen moves through the pores.
So if you have soft, spongy decay and it's starting to heal shut, one of the tactics we used to use is you want to remove all of that soft, spongy decay, and then you spray the inside with a fungicide. And then you would put, we used to use concrete. Now there are much better tactics. Again, the spray foam insulation works. You want to create a seal across that opening that the callus tissue, the new tree growth, can grow over. Because if it's a hole, it'll just curl in on itself. And squirrels will often chew those to keep the hole open. And that callus tissue has a lot of sugar, so they like that new growth as well. But you want to seal that so it's a flat surface over which that new growth can occur.
But, Mike, it appears there's no actual, it's still solid like a piece of weathered lumber, and I tend to treat it with tung oil tends to fill some of the voids and keep it from splitting. So perhaps I won't have too bad a problem.
No, that's the whole reason for pruning paint. It's not really all it does. All you're trying to do is keep the wood solid so that the new cambium growth can grow over it, and then you're forming functional sapwood over that former wound.
All right. Well, thank you for the information.
You bet. Thanks for the call. With that, we're going to take a little break. Sherry is waiting to visit with you. And by the way, the phone lines are open. We have several phone lines open. If you have a question for Dr. Peter Kolb and Sandy Perrin, that's why they are here. So the number is 721-1290. We'll be right back after this.
Montana State News Network.
I'm Dennis Bragg. If Montana property taxes do go up again in 2025, analysts with the State Department of Revenue say you can still blame the state's hot real estate market. This week, staff from Revenue warned the Montana Legislative Committee that they're expecting more reappraisals this coming year, and that will likely mean higher property taxes for some communities, similar to what happened in the past year. But they warn it's market-driven, with some areas of Montana seeing market values for homes jump by as much as 21%. This is that time of the year when you're likely evaluating whether you should dig into debt to give your family a better Christmas or just make ends meet through the winter. A new report says you're not alone, but at least Montana residents are dealing with average debt. As Jason Laird reports from Great Falls.
Montana is in the middle of the road when it comes to average household debt. In a recent study by the financial website Wallet Hub found Montana to have the 20th highest average household debt in the country at more than $151,000. The research also found that average debt in Montana went up by $644 from quarter 2 to quarter 3, which was also the 20th highest out of the 50 United States. In case you're wondering, Hawaii topped the list with an average household debt of nearly $275,000. Reporting for the Montana State News Network, I'm Jason Laird.
U.S. Senator-elect Tim Sheehy believes Montana's farmers and ranchers are relieved to see the prospect of GOP tax cuts extended. Speaking outside this week's meeting of the Montana Farm Bureau, Sheehy said that also extended to anticipation of regulations being cut back.
We've seen a regulatory environment unleashed to an extreme degree this last 3.5 years. And of course, in the farming and ranching world, that is terribly impacting them, whether it's, taking our public lands, moving them into conservation, whether it's, expanding the environmental regulations for tractors and farm equipment, raising the cost of doing business. I mean, the list goes on. So I think that they're breathing a sigh of relief that the regulatory environment's going to shift in their favor.
You're listening to the Montana State News Network.
Papa, why can't we telegraph while riding a horse?
Son, there ain't no one to blame but Jeffro. He was riding old Betsy the Stallion, tip-tapping away at his telegraph, when blam, ran right into the side of the saloon.
Well, if Jeffro can't do it, neither should you. Don't text and drive.
Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org. A message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, and the Ad Council.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. Our guests here in the studio, Dr. Peter Kolb and Sandy Perrin. And Sherry has been waiting all the way through the break. Sherry, good morning. What's on your mind, please?
Well, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I have a healthy 3-year-old apple tree, and I'm just wondering, I still have the deer protector around it, and I just wonder how long I should leave that on there.
Forever. A lot longer.
Really?
Well, yeah, it just depends certainly on the pressure in your neighborhood, but like where we're at the fairgrounds, I've seen where they have removed the protectors along the pathways there. And the trees can be 3 to 4 inch calipers, and the bucks are just raking the heck out of them. So some of the other knowledge was always like when I got 3 to 4 inches that you could take that off. But I'm saying no, because they are there's so much of a heavy population in town that it's just really raking the heck out of the branches and the trunks of those trees.
Well, you have 2 issues with the deer. One is they do like to eat apple trees, so they'll bite off the twigs and the branches.
And the buds.
And some of the does will actually scrape the bark off the tree. But this time of year, as Sandy mentioned, the bucks are going to rake their antlers. And if it's an isolated single tree is what they love the most. That becomes their marker tree. So, if it's semi-protected by other trees, maybe less so, but it's always your pride and joy that's by itself on the front lawn. That's the one that the bucks like the most.
Yeah, and especially in the wintertime, that they tend to harvest those little tender buds off, and that's your flower and growth buds for the next year, so that can really set that tree back.
So I would say once your tree gets to where the canopy is above the reach of the deer, and some of the deer will stand on their hind legs.
Yep.
But for the bucks, you want to protect that stem forever. And so I just have loose wire around it, and that just the bucks do not like the feel of wire on their antlers. So I just make a collar of wire around it and make sure that stays big enough so that it doesn't constrict the tree as it grows.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. So the phone lines are clear. If you have a question or comment for Dr. Kolb and Sandy, the lines are open at 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. Now, one of the things that we were discussing, actually, Nick is just getting a call right now. So who we got there, Mr. Nick?
Nope.
Oh, we don't have a call. Okay. One of the things that I know that you a couple of comments that you brought up with Dr. Kolb, and that is we have a brand new administration. The Trump administration is going to be taking over, and that means replacements are going all in every department, the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Forest Service, all that. And so from your point of view, what may this mean?
Well, I mean, the Trump campaign certainly issued that they want to change things rather dramatically. And from the timber perspective, federal forest perspective, recall that Montana's about 67 to 69% of Montana forests are federally managed, Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management. And of course, the Biden policy that I talked about when Biden first got elected was much more of a protectionist perspective. He initiated a massive inventory of what he called old trees. So any tree over 100 years old was considered old. And the point was that the definition of old growth was going to be modified so that any older tree, you couldn't cut it anymore. But, forests are dynamic. Trees get old, they die. Wildfires burn, insects, diseases, all those types of things. So kind of on the horizon are several potential changes in that if you've been watching any of the forestry news, the Northwest Forest Plan that President Clinton initiated that basically killed a lot of the industry in Oregon and certainly in California, they finally come to the conclusion that it's not working. And so the latest news is they really want to up the harvest, up the thinning, up the fire hazard reduction work, which is good news, potentially for the industry there. For Montana, when I started my job here 27 years ago, Montana was harvesting 1 billion board feet a year. And that wasn't rape and pillage. That was based on allowable cut. So how fast are the trees growing? We only want to harvest as much as the annual growth rate is on the trees. And that's what that billion board feet calculation came from, even though forests total are probably growing at about 5 billion board feet a year. So it was way under what when you consider wilderness areas and areas you can't get into, roadless areas. Well, this year the harvest is about 280 million board feet. So a quarter of what it was 27 years ago. And it's a chicken and the egg thing with industry. Of course, for someone to invest in a modern sawmill, wood products infrastructure, et cetera, we're looking at $50 to $100 million. That gets paid off over a 20-year period, okay, or even a 5-year period if you're really ambitious. And to do that, you have to have a timber supply. Okay, so with everything being litigated to get to death on federal lands, and we think federal lands are kind of like a big wood reservoir, if you will. Private lands have always played a very important role in Montana, but last year private lands only provided about a quarter of the needs of the wood product industry, and that's a lot of landowners like their big trees, and they've thinned their forest to reduce the fire hazard, and they've left their big trees, and they're good leaving the big trees. So that harvesting response for fire hazard reduction may have dropped off a little bit on private land. Federal lands have done very little. And so, we may see some changes in policy mandates for Forest Service to do more to support our industry. But also, one of the biggest things that's been identified, and, if you've read some news articles in the last week or so, both the National Environmental Policy Act and Endangered Species Act, which were, good for their first go around what they're trying to do. But the Endangered Species Act has been around for 50 years, and it's being used to shut down everything, and not just timber harvesting, but any kind of development, any kind of land conversion whatsoever. So they may come under scrutiny in Trump's administration, and be prepared for a lot of howling about that, because as I told an acquaintance, modifying the Endangered Species Act is kind of like saying we're going to off the dog we've had 10 years because he's been peeing and pooping in the living room for those 10 years. We've gotten used to it, and there's things we don't like about it, but we're gotten used to it, and, how dare we change anything on it? But in my opinion, Endangered Species Act needs some revision. It did its job, but, you see the issues with the grizzly bear, and now where the potential of an endangered species on a piece of land is enough to shut down management on it. It doesn't have to be there, just the potential for it to be there. So, we can probably see some review of those policies.
Yeah, we're going to come right back. By the way, the phone lines are open at 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Dr. Kolb and Sandy are here to answer your questions, so hopefully we'll hear from you right after this.
Smiles are powerful. A simple smile can light up a whole room. And for 25 years, Smile Train has been lighting up the world with smiles. And each smile marks a step towards a brighter future. As the world's largest cleft lip and palate charity, Smile Train has supported more than 2 million life-changing cleft surgeries in over 90 countries, leaving a legacy of resilience, joy, and beaming smiles for generations of children. To learn more about cleft lips and palates and how Smile Train is supporting the cleft community all over the world, please visit smiletrain.org/learn. Smile Train, lighting up the world with smiles for 25 years.
Welcome back to Talk Back. 721-1290 is our number, and thank you for responding. Dr. Peter Kolb joining us here in the studio along with Sandy Perrin. And we have Mike waiting with a question. Good morning, Mike. Thanks for calling.
Good morning, Peter. Simple question for Dr. Kolb. I've got about a dozen blue pencil junipers that had damage from last year's drought. Will they redevelop branches and leaves, or shall I just remove them and replace them?
They will develop branches and leaves to the top, so they'll grow up. If there's branches that died off that are somewhat shaded, those will not grow back. So if the top of the juniper has been damaged, those will grow back. If the bottom of the juniper has been damaged, those will not grow back.
That answers my question. I appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks for the call, Mike. Appreciate that. And Rick is standing by. Rick, good morning. You're on with Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin. Go ahead.
Yeah, I called earlier about my roses. I would like to ask Sandy, when I start to trench roses, can I transfer those to an area that I have prepared for the trenching, or do they need to stay turned over in the hole that they're growing in? Will that damage them by any extent?
How long have they been in the area they're growing in?
About 2 years.
Boy, that'll really damage that root system. That could be, really iffy how well they will do. I mean, just depends on how careful you are at getting a good root ball dug up to transfer those. That's going to be the key right there is to get enough root ball for that.
Well, I think I should probably leave them where they're at and just turn the root over.
Yep.
Okay,
that's going to be the best.
That was my question. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the call. All right, 721-1290 is our number, and we have more folks calling in with questions this morning, and that's great. The reason they're here is to answer your questions. Dr. Peter Kolb, of course, with the MSU Extension and the W.A. Franke School of Forestry and Conservation here at UM. Sandy Perrin is Missoula County horticulturist. And let's get Brad on the line. Brad, good morning. You're on Talkback. Go ahead, please.
Say, I have a question about raspberries. I've struggled with the last 3 years of what I believe are sawflies, which they skeletonize the foliage of the raspberry plant. And I can't seem to figure out how to get rid of them. They just keep coming back. And my neighbor across the street, his are great. And so how do I solve this issue?
Well, usually it's typically right when you first start to see the damage. So being vigilant out there when you start to see, because it is a fly, so it is pretty hard to, kill the adult, basically. Since it is a fly, you're going to have to be more vigilant out there when the larvae start to hatch, when you start to see the beginning of the damage, to spray. And it's probably multiple sprays. Usually,
what do I use for?
There's a lot of different varieties. A lot of the pyrethroids or synthetic pyrethroids are very effective in that. I'm not positive off the top of my head I'm sure there's some other organic solutions as well, but off the top of my head, I don't know them.
I've had real good success with insecticidal soaps.
Okay. Yeah, I wondered on that.
But you have to have contact. You got to make contact on them.
So if they're on the undersides of the leaves, and if it's a heavy, dense patch, that makes it difficult. So that's definitely the key. Okay. It has to be a contact insecticide. There are no systemics or anything like that. So thinning out that patch, and that is actually, healthy for raspberries anyway, that you only have like a cane every 6 to 8 inches. Thinning out that patch, getting control, because they are overwintering typically right in that site.
So are they wintering on the plant itself or in the soil?
In the soil is where they overwinter, since they are a fly pupa.
And so when do I start spraying? When the foliage starts to appear?
No, you have to really wait till the damage starts. That's why you do have to be vigilant and being out there at least once a week checking to see, looking on the other sides of the leaves, looking for the larva, or when you start to see the skeletonizing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
But by then, is it too late once the skeletonizing starts?
No, definitely not. Once they start, if you hit it early, you'll definitely get control. But you have to have very good coverage. So, a good pump-up sprayer that you really thoroughly douse the undersides of the leaves, since it is a contact spray only.
Of course, these are poisons, so you have to be really careful with them, right?
Right. Typically, you're not having fruit at that point anyway, so you don't have to worry about too much the days of harvest. A lot of the pyrethroids, even like pyrethrum, are very they are toxic, but they have a very low residual as far as they only last 5 to 7 days. So,
and that's why I use insecticidal soap.
Right.
But I get down on my hands and knees to get the bottom of the leaves.
Right.
You got to get the bottom of the leaves.
Exactly.
Takes some work.
It does.
We're going to come right back. By the way, the phone lines are free. They're open if you have a question for Dr. Kolb or Sandy Perrin. We'd love to have your call at 721-1290, or you can use the KGVO app, message us, and Nick will pass that along to our guests. So stay with us. Looking for your phone calls right after this.
Are you prepared for an emergency or disaster? Because it's not a matter of if, but when. Don't find yourself saying,
I'll trust water bottles and a flashlight to save the day, but I'll be proved wrong.
With a tornado approaching, I'll realize that I lack a wheelchair-accessible shelter.
When the floodwaters rise, I'll be up in the attic with 20 cans of beans. It's a recipe for disaster.
Let's prepare so we all have a better story to tell. Get started at ready.gov/older adults. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
Thinking about retirement? Make sure a My Social Security account is a part of your plan. A My Social Security account gives you secure access to your personal earnings history and benefit status. You can find out if you're eligible to receive benefits, compare retirement benefit estimates at different ages or dates, view spousal benefit estimates, and more. Plan for your future. Open a My Social Security account at ssa.gov/myaccount. Social Security. Securing today and tomorrow.
Produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.
We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. And during the break, Sandy was talking about some rather interesting experimentation going on in your department. What's happening over there?
So in our Rocky Mountain Gardens, we are kind of actively working on our next project, which is the orchard development, and along with the berry patch and that. And so we're just trying some new varieties of things that are Zone 5 hardy, but doesn't mean that they're going to live forever. But like one is a peach apricot plum cross. Weeping mulberries. I'm even experimenting with doing a hardy fig, knowing that it's not going to live outdoors through the winter months probably. It'll be in an unheated building because it can go to -10. But we're seeing more and more people ask about some of these varieties that, they are Zone 5 hardy. So theoretically they're supposed to work here, but we also understand just because they're Zone 5 hardy, when we have -30, that can certainly either take out a lot of the fruiting blossoms or can even do damage to the wood. But we get a lot of those questions, so we're just doing some experimental planting this next spring.
Now, obviously it doesn't surprise you anymore, but doing what you do for so many years, that we can have such amazing temperature fluctuations and still have beautiful gardens and trees.
Oh,
and
definitely.
Yeah.
There's so many things out there that are extremely hardy here as well if you don't want to experiment. So there, But we thought just to try out some of these things, we're just looking at some different things. There are some almonds out there that are Zone 5 as well, pawpaws. I mean, there's just so many different cultivars out there. The gal that I work with did go to school in California, and so she was showing me a different one the other day that, there are Zone 5 hardy ones of these, so, would they grow here? The fruit is very different. Would it be something? But that's how you learn, is to explore with it and go through that process and find out what it did for you. And we're a very open site there. We don't have a microclimate, where there are a lot of microclimates around western Montana that may be more desirable, but at least it'll give us that experience to tell folks what our experience were.
And I know that some of those experiments will fail. I mean, but you'll never know until you try.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a great way to this is starting off with a brand new site. Again, it's got all the elements either that are for it as far as we got we know what to do about the plant and watering and all that. We have all that automation. But do we have the environment? I mean, and there's a lot of things that we talk about, and with all the zone changes that have came in the last 20 years, I'm not guaranteeing that they're going to last very long, but we'll find out.
And so those experiments don't fail. They just tell us what's going to grow and what's not going to grow. So just for scientific vernacular, Peter.
Thank you. That's why I bow to the superior intellects here. But I know one of the things that you brought up, Dr. Kolb, and I did an interview with the gal from the Bitterroot National Forest about it's time to cut Christmas trees. Yeah, and you can get a permit for like $15 and get up to 3 trees, from what I understand. So yeah,
I just looked up the Lolo National Forest webpage, and so a permit is $5 per tree for the Lolo National Forest, and you get up to 3. And the rules are no tree larger or taller than 12 feet or 6 inches stem diameter. And, of course, there's areas where they don't want you to cut trees. So campgrounds, recreational areas, things like that. They do say not within sight of a road, but, of course, road cuts are sometimes where you have the most prolific trees. Right. And, the recommendation is to cut a tree out of a clump of dense trees. Of course, anybody who's done that realizes that if you're cutting out a clump of dense trees, you have a Charlie Brown tree. So my rule is if you see a clump of trees, you can remove the tree on the outside that has a nice thick form, but it'll typically have a flat side, which is great for putting it up against a wall or something like that. The only way you'll get a Christmas tree, like commercially grown Christmas tree, that's this perfect cone-shaped tree, if it's open grown and has light on both sides or all sides, and of course those are the ones we don't want you to cut because they got space to grow. So if you're going to go cut from National Forest, find a clump of trees that are within the height. And if you look carefully, the outside ones in that clump will usually have 75% good side on it with one flat side. That's great for...
Turn that to the wall.
Correct. And, of course, the Christmas trees, you're going to kill it by cutting it, but the trick is to keep them hydrated as long as possible. Right. And so as soon as you cut it, I'd even consider wrapping cellophane over the fresh cut stump with a rubber band over it. As soon as you get it home, cut the bottom ½ inch off of the stem because now that has air embolized, so it's not conducting water anymore, and put it in a bucket of water. And keep it nice and cool. If your Christmas tree inside is next to a heat vent or any place where there's warm air flowing, it'll dry a lot quicker. And for the first week, that tree will go through a gallon or 2 of water every day. Wow. So once its xylem, its vascular tissue shuts down, that's when it'll stop. And then there's always this question, so, well, should I add sugar, honey, 7-Up, all those things? And, the answer is yes, just not too much of it, because the sugar will keep that living tissue alive. The biggest thing is no air bubbles in there. So a trick we used to use a long time ago when we're measuring vascular systems in trees and cut branches is we would de-air the water. So you boil it and then let it cool, and that's what you hydrate your tree with because it doesn't have air bubbles in it. Or just hot water and let it cool down, and it has less air in it, and so the tree will absorb it a lot better. But alcohol, bleach, anything that inhibits nasty things from growing in there. But the main thing is just keep it well watered. And if you're going to use any supplements, don't use too much, okay? Because all those things are also toxic to the tree and too much. Favorite trees, mine is subalpine fir. Nice cone shape, but you got to go up high. So Lolo Pass is where you would find those, higher elevation. Next favorite is grand fir. Flat needles, very dark color, shaded, wet areas is where they grow. And I've found those to hold their needles for months. Pines usually drop them pretty fast. Spruces will drop them pretty fast. The spruces are pretty pokey and maybe not as aromatic. I mean, sometimes people refer to certain spruces as skunk spruce because they're very strong smelling. Just things to think about, what your own preference is, but keep them hydrated as quickly as possible, and cutting the end off of that cut stem once you put it in the bucket is really important, because all those thousands of little straw ends get air pockets in them and they won't conduct water anymore.
You will not get an education like this for any price, folks. So just get it right here with Dr. Kolb and Sandy, and we really appreciate their expertise in sharing all this information with us. And the phone lines, by the way, that are still open. We have about 8 minutes left in our time together with Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin. So give us a call if you would at 721-1290, and we'll get you the best advice you can get right after this. And we are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. It's been a great morning so far. Lots of great advice from Dr. Kolb and Sandy Perrin. And in lieu of calls, we were just talking about your Sandy, that you're also on the look for greens without giving anything away, any secret locations. But it's all out there if you just know where to go.
Yeah, so again, making sure where you are harvesting, that you are harvesting sustainably, not, taking all right next to the road, all the limbs off one tree, look for blowdowns, things like that. But there's a lot of, you can use for that for decorating, making wreaths, something I love to do, getting that fresh smell indoors.
Now, obviously, we're talking about public lands, right? Private property is off limits unless you get permission. But as far as public lands go, where are the best places to go that are easily accessible?
Well, a lot of places you want to go is you're looking for that moisture content. Places that have not a south sunny hillside. So you're looking for some things that have more creeks and ravines in them to get up in there into the places that have a little bit more moisture. Trees are growing faster, healthier. So that's and plus then they're easier to work with and also last longer, because typically you're putting these either in a house where they're going to dry out or on the front door they're going to dry out.
Well, and, I have no problem giving away a favorite spot. Up Lolo Pass, go up past the hot springs, and then there's all sorts of gated Forest Service roads. So you park on the gate by the gate, walk up the road half a mile or a mile. You'll find more trees than you can shake a stick at, and a lot of old harvest units. Okay, so you go into a big, old, dense, tall forest, you're not going to find what you're looking for. So the old clear cuts are ideal places, and there's often have way more trees than they can have, and that's where you're going to find, especially on the north slopes, the grand fir and the subalpine fir.
Okay, let's get Jeff on the line. He's back with another question. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Hey, real quick question. Do you guys have any good ways to keep birds off of berries and cherries?
Netting. Netting is the best.
Netting is.
Yeah, I mean, is what called bird scare tape. It's a reflective tape. I have seen it work to some degree, but a lot of times they get used to it. Again, it depends on the pressure and what else is in your neighborhood for the birds to eat. But if there are, blueberries, honeyberries, things like that, they are just favorites. So it somewhat depends on your species. Even this summer, I had people tell me that certain areas, the raspberries were just getting ate up by the birds, and it's not a yearly occurrence, but it obviously alluded to what is in the native environment was awfully dry and not producing for them.
Yeah, most of the deterrents, like fake owls and things like that, will work for a short period of time, and the animals are smart. They figure things out pretty quick.
That owl's not moving.
Exactly.
I have a fake owl.
Audio ones.
Go ahead.
The noisemakers.
The audio alarms, yeah.
Yeah, I have heard there was a berry grower up the rattlesnake that was growing a lot of service berries, and he tried that, and again, he said it worked for a while, but then they got used to it. It just did not work long term.
These animals are surviving because they're not stupid. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just thinking that I've tried the netting. The problem is it gets caught in the branches so much that I end up having to basically cut it out.
Yeah, you do have to basically build a frame. There's a lot of places they're called like smart netting, things like that you're building a frame that's, so you can easily stand in it and it's way above, like if it's berry bushes, then, you have like a 8-foot frame up there where you're keeping your berry branches down to 6 feet. So it's not growing up through it. You do have to make a larger frame for that netting to be easily for you and the bushes to survive. The ones that just barely go over the bushes, you're right. The branches grow up through it, and then you're sacrificing next year's buds when you go to remove that netting.
And you need to check it every day because the birds will get underneath it, and then they're trapped in there. And
Yeah, it's almost like they're devious, intelligent creatures.
They are.
They are.
Thanks.
All right, Jeff, thanks for the call. We have about 2 minutes left, so a minute for each of you to Sandy. So tell us what you're working on as we head toward the holidays.
Yeah, so we're still actively doing our Cultivate to Cook classes. We have one coming up tomorrow night that is on herbs, but what's going to be really fun for December is we are doing chocolate waffles with strawberries and a cheesecake sauce, and I'll be talking poinsettias.
Yeah. See you guys.
Yeah.
All right, so go ahead, Dr. Kolb.
Oh, well, we are kind of in the planning phase for next year's the workshops for forest landowners, et cetera. So this is kind of a time to write annual reviews, review our programs, and plan for next year.
All right, so how do we contact each of you? We'll talk about you, Sandy, a phone number, email address, that sort of thing.
So you can easily get a hold of me at the office at 406-258-4213 or Perrin, Perrin, at MissoulaCounty.us.
All right. Dr. Kolb, please.
Peter.Kolb, that's KOLB, at umontana.edu.
All right. Do you guys have plans for the holidays at all? I mean, obviously you do.
Hang out with the family.
Oh, imagine that. All right.
Well, there's still a week and a half of some big game hunting.
Aha.
So I've been seeing more predators than I have been big game, which does not make me happy. But and then skiing and family get together.
Sounds great. Thanks you both for being with us and answering all these questions. We appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, and thanks to all of our callers too. Mr. Nick, what's coming up on tomorrow's fabulous program, sir?
As of now, we're going to do a full 2 hours of open phones.
All right, so get ready, everybody. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Now to get a big thank you to Dr. Peter Kolb and Sandy Perrin for sharing their expertise with us. And, of course, most importantly, thank you for your calls because your calls make it interesting and you always ask such great questions. We appreciate every single one of you. So get out there and enjoy the non-winter so far. I'm sure we're going to get our share. So have a great day, everybody.